Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are we doing today?
Well, it's the final episode of the year somehow. And as we have done every year since the show's start, we are going to count down what we came up with as the top 10 soundtracks of the year.
It is our 5th year doing this at year's end, and that is always hard to believe as time just marches on. We'll have our 5th anniversary in a few weeks from now, but it's always fun to see how first we put our own top 10 lists together and then synthesize them into the list, and how does that shake out? Do we feel good with it? And we throw in some honorable mentions in there. It's always fascinating to see how this gets pulled together. Always a lot of work, never easy, but still a good result in the end to hear the best game music of the year.
Yeah, somehow these episodes have like the most prep work and prep time of anything we do for this show, except maybe when we did the 200th episode.
Oh yeah, that was a whole bunch of surveys and the best game music of the decade. That was a good one for sure. But I mean, this one, the tight time windows and making sure we try to account for as many games as possible. It's always interesting.
And we're going to be getting messages, I'm sure, at some point saying, you missed this thing. And look, man, there's a lot of video games. They all come out all at the same time. And what do you want from me?
And I think another point, too, is that 2023 was a really remarkable year in game music. We keep saying that every year, and I feel like it only gets stronger and stronger. And this was a really good year. I think the top 10 list is really solid. Happy with it. And I think there's no better way to kick this list off than with number 10. Let's get it going. Number 10, the best soundtracks for video games in 2023. And number 10, we have The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. I know some people may have found it to be a little disappointing, but still good enough to crack our top 10. Composers on Tears of the Kingdom include Manaka Kataoka, Maasa Miyoshi, Masato Ohashi, and Tsukasa Usui. And so what we do is we play what we think are the 5 critical tracks for each game in our top 10, and it starts off with Tears of the Kingdom with main theme. After that, we dive into the whole other world in Hyrule, and it's Dive to the Depths. One of the standout boss battle tracks for the game, this one is Colgera. You fight him certainly many more times than you do in the original Breath of the Wild, but this battle track is Master Koga. And what better way to end a Critical 5 list for Tears of the Kingdom than with Demon Dragon.
Colgera is really cool. Especially when it like really kicks in and you realize what it is. I kind of like that boss too. I think that might be among my favorite bosses in the game. But that song, excellent, 100%.
It was a pretty creative one for sure. Looking back on it, kind of makes me wish I did that boss first instead of like third. So I know they mean to have you do it first, but still.
Hang out with the Rito first. And of course, much like you, I did not do that.
Yeah.
I went and hung out with the Zora and then the Gerudo before I went and hung out with the Rito.
What do you think about the comments of Tears of the Kingdom's soundtrack and expectations versus how it delivered?
It's very conflicting because I like the soundtrack of Breath of the Wild. And I think it does well in not being very present unless it has to be. Which, granted, I made the criticism at one point that it makes it kind of weird to give it like best soundtrack when the soundtrack is barely present.
Yeah, I think that was a weird choice for Game Awards nominations and things like that, yeah.
Yeah, but that's just like, I can also see the argument for, well, I mean, it did exactly what the soundtrack wanted to do. Why wouldn't it be nominated? Like, it's a whole thing there. I think Tears of the Kingdom has a soundtrack that is overall more present, and especially for the boss themes. I could not point out most of the boss themes in Breath of the Wild if you played them for me. But Colgera and like Master Koga, 100% I could tell you what those are for. Colgera especially. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to. It depends on which version of the soundtrack you prefer, I guess, personally.
Yeah, and I think one thing in this game's favor is that the musical highs are higher. Granted, I think people were expecting more music than what was in Breath of the Wild, and maybe they didn't get that necessarily, but it kind of keeps the overall theming of what Hyrule is and what the world is and how you texture that musically. So I think it's still quality what's here, but maybe people were expecting more and they didn't get that exactly. You had Tears of the Kingdom at number 10 on your list, and I had it at number 8 on mine.
So I think it is telling that it was rather high on both of our lists in terms of I guess low. I can never tell which one I'm supposed to say. But it was in the higher numbers for both of us. Now, let's move on to the next game, which is here because of me. I'm the one that did this, because this soundtrack made me cry, and I'm gonna make it everybody else's problem. This is number 9, A Space for the Unbound, composed by Mastido Bakhtiar and Christabel Anora. And we're gonna start with the critical track number 1. This is Kopi Dang Kue. Getting a bit more into a more intense piece, critical track number 2 is Berserker's Cry. Going into some of the vocal tracks in the game, the first is critical track number 3, Selfishness Arranged Version.
They break people's heart again. They can't do nothing but take in. Unfortunately, they can't go.
Them pulling everything in for a final boss in a game that does not feel like it should have one. This is A Wish for the Unbound. critical track number 5 is actually my favorite song and the one that hits me the hardest every time. This is Within the Dream.
And I closed my eyes, feeling lighter and lighter. This emptiness is killing me, and please hold my hands, hold them tighter and tighter. Don't let them go. Please save me from my dream.
I don't think we've had a time before where we have a game show up on Best Of at the end of the year that we've already covered on the show. You did a great solo episode on this back in August, and I really enjoyed listening to it through that. And maybe some of these tracks do sound familiar to some of our listeners, but kind of interesting to have a game that we talk about earlier in the year that comes out the calendar year and then shows up on Best Of.
I can't think of another instance where that has happened. The main reason I covered it like this year instead of waiting until next year or something was to try and make a case for it being here. I really, really loved A Space for the Unbound. I think, personally, you would enjoy A Space for the Unbound. And people that like the kind of games that I play would very, very much like A Space for the Unbound, I think. It's a very good story. It's a game from a region that I'm pretty sure this is the only game we've ever talked about from that region, being Indonesia. And I really, really like the soundtrack. I think it strikes a very good balance between the more melancholy stuff and then like stuff like Berserker's Cry, which is this intense, almost angry song. And then stuff like Kobidan Kue, which is just, it's just happy, existing youth music. I think it does a very, very good job at striking a balance between all of those types. And yeah, it's one of my favorite games of the year, and it's one of my favorite soundtracks of the year. 100%.
You had A Space for the Unbound at number 5 on your list, which brought it here to number 9. I did not have it on my top 10.
But one we did both have in our top 10s is number 8, which is admittedly also a game that is here because of me. Well, maybe not not as much as A Space for the Unbound, but like, I feel like I played a large role in this. Number 8 is A Highland Song, with its soundtrack composed by Lawrence Chapman, Talisk, and Fourth Moon. And let's get into the sounds of the Scottish Highlands with critical track number 1. This is A Highland Song. There are rhythm game segments in A Highland Song, and one of the songs that plays during such segments is critical track number 2, Celestial. Highland Song has some very, very beautiful, just sort of almost ambient area music. And one of the best examples of that is Critical Track number 3, The Beltane Tide. Another highly beautiful piece on the soundtrack that is, once again, not written for the game, but a major part of the game. This is The Hills. And lastly, the game and soundtrack end on a piano rendition of the main theme, and you know me, it's gotta be there at that point. This is A Highland Fantasia.
Probably the latest that a game has come out in the calendar year and then still made it to the top 10. But, once this showed up in, I believe it was an Indie World, a Nintendo, a little Direct Mini kind of thing, we kind of had pegged that soundtrack right away as like, oh, keep your eyes and ears on that one. It helps that it's, Lawrence Chapman, who we had already covered on the show in episode 115 for his work on Heaven's Vault. That certainly helps. But, to hear the full soundtrack and have it deliver in this way, it's really nice to hear fresh takes on video game music, especially when it's directly inspired by different regions of the world. And love to hear that. And I think it's so deserving. I think we had pegged it pretty early that, a Highland Song is probably going to crack the top 10. I don't know how high it's going to get, but it'll at least crack top 10.
And I think 8's a relatively good place for it, all things considered, when it comes to the overall placement. The game soundtrack is beautiful, as we just covered, but also the game itself is beautiful, though for me, it kind of highlighted an issue with me that is not the game's fault, but certainly kind of painted my playthrough, which is, man, I'm really impatient with not knowing where I'm supposed to go in a video game.
Oh, sure.
And that's part of the point in a Highland Song, is you're supposed to find where you're supposed to go by exploring. And so my brain fought against that real hard the whole time, but I came away from the game with a very good impression of it. I will say a piece of advice for anybody that does play, which it's not a very long game, honestly. I want to say that I had to start over like once because they added a feature that actually fixed one of my problems. So that was neat. And so I started the whole game over. But I want to say my final playthrough was maybe like 4 hours long. It ain't a long game. A piece of advice for anybody that plays, near the very end of the game, there is a bench. I highly advise you sit on that bench. That is all the information you will get out of me.
As you mentioned, we both had a Highland song on our personal top 10 lists. You had it at number 6. I had it just cracking the top 10 at number 10. We move on to number 7 for the best of 2023. And this one is Alan Wake 2. You can thank me for that one. We'll get into that. Composers on this one include Petri, Alanko, and many others, because Alan Wake 2 is interesting in the sense that the music that's at least released out there for a soundtrack are the licensed songs that were created specifically for the game, with lyrics that directly highlight the plot and go in specific points, like at ends of chapters or during chapters. Not much out there for the score, but it creates some of the best musical moments of the year. And let's start off with this Critical 5 for Alan Wake 2 with Follow You Into the Dark.
Call the secrets from your crystal heart. Save my story, tear every page apart. Disciples when you left your heart. We burn away the shadows, they strike us apart. Follow you to the dark. Follow you to the dark, dark, dark. Follow you to the dark. Follow you to the dark, 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 dark. Follow you to the dark. Follow you to the dark, dark, dark.
After that, I feel like there was a track that played when Alan Wake 2 was winning awards at the Game Awards, and this one is Wide Awake.
I was calling you, did you hear me? I lost my way, lost my way. I was trapped in 1,000 nights with no escape. Nightmares taking me over, and now I'm wide awake. And now I'm wide awake. Oh, I died like 1,000,000 times, feel the waves I break. The nightmare's finally over, and now I'm wide awake. And now I'm wide awake. Blinding lights, burning eyes.
Of course, we have to include one of the musical moments of the year, quite literally, which you also saw/heard at the Game Awards. This is Herald of Darkness.
Show me the champion of light. I'll show you the herald of darkness. Lost in the
Stories of crime and chilling thrillers of hard-boiled killers became bestsellers. It was all too much.
Following that is a track called This Road.
Some say that it lives forever this way. I can see you there, but you don't see me anywhere. I'm right in front of you, I'm right here on this long ending road. What are you looking at? Is it your face on a pane of glass? 'Cause somehow this window becomes a trap on this winding road. Will it ever let me go? Forever I am fading to black. Forever I am circling back just to fall into this trap.
And to round things out, for a Remedy game, you gotta have a little bit of ahti. And so this track is called Yotan Yo.
Hän peilistä sua tuijottaa. Murhan polten se kruunui mua. Tuon katseen tunnet, et voi unohtaa. Vaik kasvot piiloutuu veriverhon taa. On yötön yö, se järjen syö. On yötön yö, se miehen syö. Puukkohippaan tanssi pian vaihtuu, hirreen vääntyy jo verinen suu. Viinapullosta korkki hukataan.
So I've not played Alan Wake 2, mostly because I've never played Alan Wake 1. I've owned it for years, but I've never played it, and I feel like I need to play that, and American Nightmare, and the Alan Wake Control DLC before I can even think about touching Alan Wake 2.
I might just rely on Sam Lake talking for 15 minutes about what I need to know from it, to be honest.
I mean, I've heard that it is a very, very good horror game. Alan Wake 1, not Alan Wake 2. Obviously, I've heard that game is good. We wouldn't be talking about it probably if it wasn't. But Alan Wake 1 is a generally highly regarded horror game, and that's my lane. So maybe next year I will get through the whole Alan Wake quadrilogy, as it were.
Alan Wake 2 is also a game I have not played. It's on my Christmas list, so if Santa comes and delivers it, that might be a game I am playing shortly. But after Control, definitely had to keep eyes on Remedy and what they're doing, to the point where in the promotion for Alan Wake 2 leading up to it, I was just like, horror game, survival horror, psychological thriller. Is it really my thing? And then I see more of it. It's like, oh, I'm probably very interested. And for the soundtrack, when it came to researching it, it was one of those things like, really, like Alan Wake 2 getting nominated at award shows like the Game Awards. I know I heard about, everyone was talking about this We Sing moment, but okay. And then you start to listen to it. It's one of those like, well, I better pencil it into my top 10 because this is amazing. Herald of Darkness is astounding, and I can see why We Sing hits. Can't wait to experience it. I purposely skipped over the Game Awards performance.
Oh, it was like one of the only good parts, and it was remarkably good.
I mean, I don't doubt that. I was just trying to save a little bit for when I eventually play the game, because I knew it's like, oh, it's Alan Wake 2's got this moment that you try not to spoil it, but it kind of happens when you get into some soundtrack research. But I was blown away by the soundtrack, not only by Herald of Darkness, but by some of the others on the soundtrack. So much so that I had Alan Wake 2 at number 3 on my personal top 10 list, whereas it did not make the cut for you, Joe.
Not quite. I want to say it'd probably have been 12.
As we get to number 6 on the best of 2023, it is Marvel's Spider-Man 2, with music by composer John Paisano. Well, it's quite the big blockbuster of the year, unfortunately marred by the Insomniac hack story, but let's still get into this cinematic game soundtrack. And we got to open with the main menu theme. This first one for the Critical 5 for Marvel Spider-Man 2 is Greater Together. In one of the best opening tutorial set pieces of the year, the music that goes along with it is called Swing. Kraven may not have been the best villain in the game, but he was at least a formidable one, and he had a great theme to go with it. This next track is called The Great Hunter. One of the big late game boss battles that is pretty memorable, I would say. This track is called Fighting Back. And then we get to the final boss with a bit of a somber note, and this track that goes with it is called Midtown Madness.
So I have not played Spider-Man 2 yet, because I lack a PS5, though I have already told my roommate that I will be stealing his PS5 when Rebirth comes out, because I'm not having that spoiled for me. And Spider-Man 2, I may ask if I can borrow it to try playing it at some point soon, because I know he bought it. So it's present in my apartment. That being said, when listening through the tracks you picked to sort of see where it would fall on my list, Swing is the song that sold me 100% immediately.
It's a delightful way to open the game, and it gets you smiling right away as you are dealing with the two Spider-Men who are being greater together. This is one of my favorite games of the year. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's interesting to think of like, where does this rank compared to the original Spider-Man soundtrack? I think it helps that John Paisano had more work with the Miles Morales game and try to develop his character and his leitmotifs, and then you're bringing the two together to tell a bigger, more bombastic story. It's interesting to hear the creative directors talk about how if the first game was their Iron Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe equivalent, this game is their Civil War, whereas they're going to be gearing up for a third game that's like their end game. So it's exciting to kind of see the seeds it plants and where it'll go from there, but Paisano's just getting better and better of kind of creating this Marvel sound with this Insomniac created world.
And I do really appreciate, you mentioned like Paisano got a lot of like experience figuring out Miles's, I guess what I'm getting at is I really like that you can feel the difference in personality between Peter and Miles's music, and you can tell who's being focused on just by listening to some of the songs.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. I dig that a lot.
And we had Marvel's Spider-Man 2 pretty much pegged right at the same place on both of our lists. We both had it at number 7, which was enough to bump it up to number 6 on the final.
It's weird how that works. I vaguely understand how we do, because pulling back the curtain, Peter's the one that handles like compiling the two lists and figuring out the ranking. And I vaguely understand how it's done, and it makes sense, but that's also really funny.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's put it this way. So when you have a track that's number 1 on your personal list, it gets 10 points. All the way down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it kind of works in reverse order on how many points it gets. There may be some tiebreakers, which then we put different little tiebreaker stocks in. For example, if we have a game on both of our lists, that's going to get preference on one compared to if like one game was ranked highly on one list, but it's not on the other. So having the game on both lists does it a lot of favors for sure. The other would then be, is it ranked higher on one list than another? Does that make a difference? So it really works out quite well. And I think to have it on both lists kind of at the same spot gives a lot of benefits that way. For a complete opposite, and you want to talk about opposite end of the spectrum there, let's get to number 5 on the best of 2023. And this is Final Fantasy 16 with music by Masayoshi Soken. Soken finally getting his due on a soundtrack hitting the top 10 on original Soundchat. Isn't that wild? Well, let's get to talking about Final Fantasy 16, starting with the opening theme, the title theme, the main theme, if you will. This is Land of Icons. As Clive, you are going to be battling plenty of icons throughout the game, and the main battle theme that takes place for those big grand encounters is to sail forbidden seas. When you finally accept the truth, it essentially turns into a whole other character theme entirely, and this track is called Find the Flame. You gotta love when Soken gives a little shout out and gives some work to the Primals. And you know what? A good example of that is the track called Titan Lost. And who doesn't love a good ending credits theme that will just rip the heart from your chest? This track is called My Star.
Starlight, say goodnight. Star bright.
So once again, I did not play FF16. So the thing I sort of realized putting this together is that, man, not having a PS5 or an Xbox Series, whatever the hell, means I did not play almost any of the big releases this year that weren't Zelda. Unfortunately. But listening through these tracks, I had this little bit where it's like, oh, this is really good, but like, where's the Soken touch? And then I hit Titan Lost, it's like, there it is. You hit the processed vocals, it's like, I found him. I found Masayoshi Soken.
And there are some tracks where like he goes even weirder. Like there's a kind of a mid-game boss where he just like drops some EDM in there. And
Yeah.
it was one that was like right on the cutting room floor. This was a really hard Critical 5 to put together. It is my favorite soundtrack of the year. I think it was well-deserved to win the Game Award. We'll see how it does in the BAFTAs and DICE and all that. But this soundtrack is remarkable, in my opinion. And it was so good to finally be inducted into the Church of Soken.
And it should be noted, before we started this part, you mentioned Soken finally getting his due, and some people might say, wait, but like Endwalker was like 2 years ago. Yeah, and Endwalker's soundtrack literally got released today.
Yeah.
And anybody that put it up on YouTube, Square pulled it down immediately. So we literally could not have put it on that top 10 that year if we wanted to, honestly, but we could not.
Yes, I think that's an important distinction there, yeah. And then to give clarification, I did have this game, Final Fantasy 16, as my number one soundtrack of the year. You had it at number 9. So there's the difference of how the points can factor it in and kind of put it at middle of the road.
I'm not certain why it ended up at number 9 for me, but like, I don't know, that still kind of feels right for me, and I could not explain to you why, but hey, as long as Soken is getting his recognition, because that man can write some goddamn music.
I'd say wait until if you eventually play this game. These songs are much better in context.
Now let's talk about another game I did not play. Neither of us played this one, I don't think, despite the fact that it has been praised to hell and back. And from what I hear, for good reason. This is number 4, Baldur's Gate 3. And of course, Baldur's Gate 3, the soundtrack was composed by Borislav Slavov. So let's jump into, I guess we're sticking with the relatively traditional fantasy setting here, even though both games, from what I am aware, do different things with each. Critical track number 1 is Twisted Force. Critical track number 2, you have Gather Your Allies. Critical track number 3 pulls the tone back a little bit with Down by the River.
Lace your heart with mine. Let your sleeping soul take flight. Take me through the night. Down, down, down by the river. Down, down, down by the river.
Baldur's Gate has a main theme that has 3 parts, and I don't understand the significance of that, but when we asked friends who had played the game, the version that was suggested to us overall was main theme part 3. And lastly, critical track number 5 is the song that plays on the credits. This is The Power credits song.
Starlight burning the tower. Hold tight, don't fight the power. Firelight burning the tower. Hold tight, don't fight, don't lose the power. I went away 'cause I missed you, baby. You are not me, and am I truly
Baldur's Gate 3 is another case where you see it sweeping these big award shows and giving big praise, rightfully so. But unfortunately, it seems like Wizards of the Coast doesn't want to give their employees any such benefit of that praise, despite this game is essentially licensed to be a Dungeons and Dragons game. It's the best iteration of all of the different kind of narrative permutations that can happen in a Dungeons and Dragons game, but that's neither here or there. It's a case when listening to the soundtrack and going into research, it's like, all right, I know I got nominated, but how good could this soundtrack really be? Oh, it's like Lord of the Rings level? Okay, all right, fine, let's write that into the top 10.
Yeah, it's really, really good. On its face, Baldur's Gate does not seem like a game I would be into, but I have now seen multiple people whom I would have sworn it was not their kind of game play it and absolutely adore it. So I fully plan on giving it a shot at some point. When that point will be, only my bank account will tell. But eventually, I do want to give Baldur's Gate 3 a chance, and I'm glad that I was able to hear like a good chunk of the soundtrack while preparing for this episode, because yeah, it's really, really, really good. Down by the River is 100% a standout for sure. One of the tracks that almost made it on here, I had described to me as it's the musical number your final boss sings to you as it's happening. And I don't understand what that means, and I need to know.
Yeah, it sounds like it has a lot of fantastic musical moments for sure. If I eventually find myself with a way to play my Steam library portably, because I just don't see myself sitting down at the computer for 130 some hours, it might be a game worth giving a shot, even though I agree with you on its face. Not a game I'd be interested in either, but you can't deny the critical acclaim. And obviously, the musical acclaim is also there.
And I think the main reason that I would play on not my Steam Deck, it runs okay on Steam Deck from what I've been told. Like, not as well as it's going to run on a PC, obviously. But the main reason I would probably play on PC is because the multiplayer is apparently extremely fun.
Oh, if that's your thing, I'm sure that would be something to give a shot. For me, I think that'd be still a game I'd like to have as a solo adventure, but also my PC is 6 years old, so getting a little long in the tooth there.
My PC could not run Baldur's Gate 3. I can say that with full certainty.
You had Baldur's Gate 3 at number 3 on your list, and I had it at number 6. We continue on our best game soundtracks of 2023 list with number 3, Sea of Stars, with composers Eric W. Brown, also known as Rainbow Dragon Eyes, and Yasunori Mitsuda. Yes, the next game from Sabotage finds its way here. One at the beginning of the year that knew this soundtrack was going to be in the top 10 somewhere. I am pleasantly surprised it made it all the way to number 3. Let's start this Critical 5 with the track that you're going to hear so much in this game, and it's a good thing. It's a banger. It's called Battle On. Up next is the character theme for the best boy and best party member. This track is called Dance of 1000 Suns. We love a good boss battle theme, and one that'll hype you up in Sea of Stars is called Encounter Elite. I think it's pretty unforgettable when the big boss encounter at the end of Act 1 unleashes the most devastating attack that you've seen thus far, and it's a good thing that the music that goes along with it is also just top-notch. This is called The Storm Calls for You. And if you're wondering what the big secret is with Mesa Island in Sea of Stars, I know when I played, I could not help but pop off extremely hard for this song. This track to round out the Critical 5 is called The Frozen Peak Day.
I'm sitting here, staring at the desktop shortcut for Sea of Stars, which has been installed in my computer since launch day. And it's one of like 4 games where I told myself at the beginning of December, alright, I'm going to try and get through these. And then I didn't. But this soundtrack is very good.
Yeah, it's a good thing it is too, because, you know, for it to be inspired by RPGs of the past, like Chrono Trigger, the music drives everything, and the team did an incredible job. Rainbow Dragon Eyes, Eric W. Brown, like, did the really heavy lifting for the soundtrack, and it's nice to hear some of Mitsuda's contributions as well. But when you're coming off of The Messenger, and how do you deliver on top of that? It's really, really good. I mean, but the music drives the bulk of the auditory experience, especially when there isn't voice acting or anything like that. Again, the music just really, really sells it, and gotta give a game its props when it does that for sure. I think it's a game you have to play. It's one I played. That's the last game I beat this year, and just thoroughly enjoyed it. So much so to the point that my fiance, when she was watching it, decided that she was going to pick up and play it, and she's never played a top-down RPG like that before. So it's really, really neat to see. I think you'll fully enjoy it, and with just, you know, a taste of some of the tracks here, so many to leave off on a cutting room floor for this game, but I think you'll really enjoy it when you do get to it.
Hopefully soon. I've told myself that after Christmas, when work gets extremely slow, it's Cocoon, it's Thirsty Suitors, I think it's the game Little Goody Two Shoes, but we'll see if I get through that. But, like, Sea of Stars is 100% up there, and I would very much like to play it, so here's hoping my brain lets me.
I really liked Sea of Stars and its soundtrack, but I still had it at number 5 on my list. You did some of the heavy lifting and put it at number 2.
Yeah, I really, really dug it, and I did, in fact, dig, especially when I hit the Frozen Peak, even as somebody who has not played that game. Still a hype drop just hearing it in the soundtrack in general.
Oh, it's special, and you kind of get to see it coming, but to really have it realized is just spectacular.
In what is becoming a pattern, number 2 is also a game I did not play, and I believe this is one neither of us played, but we saw a lot of people comment on a lot of nominations for multiple awards saying that it was snubbed super hard, and after hearing some of it, I agree. Number 2 is Octopath Traveler 2. That's right. Did you remember that game came out this year? Because I genuinely keep forgetting. Because I keep thinking it came out last year. It's one of those games where, you know, like, you'll play a game at the start of the year and then it's so hard to, like, remember, oh no, that was this year.
We've got one in our honorable mentions that is the perfect example of that, yeah.
So, Octopath Traveler 2, much like the first game, its soundtrack was composed by Yasunori Nishiki, And the 5 critical tracks are as follows. Number 5 is Normal Battle 2. Critic track number 2 is, and I promise the rest of them are not named this boringly, Boss Battle Critical Clash 2. Track number 3 is the one that actually wowed me, personally. This is Song of Hope. Critical track number 4, this is The Journey for Kingship Ends. Of course, critical track number 5, using context clues, I assume is the final boss theme. This is Those Who Deny the Dawn.
Just a spectacular soundtrack. Very easy to see why people thought it got snubbed for big awards. So you hope that BAFTA's DICE coming up. Keep an eye on Octopath Traveler 2 because Nishiki really brought it like he did in the original game, and almost stepping up his game a little bit. There's a track on there that is Daughters of the Dark God, which is the final boss in the first game, and it's just like elevated even more for like the big secret super boss, I guess, in Octopath Traveler 2. So just super impressive. In case you're wondering, for the final boss, for those who denied the dawn, is that the same opera vocalist as who was featured in Fire Emblem Three Houses God Shattering Star? You bet it is.
Huh.
So there you go. Getting some good work all around. Yeah, Octopath Traveler 2 is a legit soundtrack, and really happy to listen to some of these tracks and put it as highly as we did. I think number 2 is a good spot for it.
And it just comes down to, I guess, 2 things are the big reasons it's getting snubbed, I think. Well, 3 things, actually, I guess. One being Final Fantasy 16 came out this year.
Right.
And that's the game that Square was always going to be the one pushing. 2, Square is really bad at advertising any game they publish that is not called Final Fantasy. And 3, it came out in February.
Right.
And that might as well have been 6 years ago.
It seems to be that way, and I think that's a good way to kind of lay it out there. I had Octopath Traveler 2 at number 2 on my personal list, and you had it at number 4.
Much like the first game, I don't know, I'm just a sucker for violin. And these soundtracks for both of them have really good violin work. And that's the way to my heart, I guess.
Before we get to number 1, we'd like to highlight some honorable mentions. We each picked 5 games that just missed the cut for us and kind of put together 10 more games here to highlight 1 track from each. And Joe, let's start with you here in alphabetical order.
Yeah, so this one was actually in my top 10 and was brought up so many times when we asked people for suggestions. The first honorable mention goes to Armored Core 6 Shadows of Rubicon, whose soundtrack was composed by Kota Hoshino, Takashi Onodera, and Shoei Miyazawa. And the track picked to highlight and represent it is Steel Haze, Rusted Pride. Armored Core is another game where I feel like I really, really want to give it a shot, and the soundtrack really surprised me. I kind of just like how, overall, it's just this really oppressive, deep, electronic soundtrack for the most part, and that, I don't know, I found that to be very cool and very different from what I'm used to when it's a mech game. A lot of people very happy that Armored Core came back this year. FromSoft makes good video games, and apparently this is one of them, though the thing that I find funny about the release of Armored Core is that apparently it is designed in such a way where if you go in thinking you can play it like a Souls game, it is specifically built to kick your ass.
That's interesting. I had this soundtrack at about like number 12, I'd say, just off my list, so good that you put it in, and I think you had it at number 8.
Yeah, it was somewhere up there. I'm glad it at least made it into the honorable mentions. Like I said, a lot of people brought it up. when we were asking for suggestions. Another one from me, our second honorable mention, is Coffee Talk Episode 2, Hibiscus and Butterfly, with the soundtrack by Andrew Jeremy. It's more lo-fi, beats to study to, beats to coffee to, just like the first game. And the song that I picked personally to represent it is 24 Hours Rainfall. I really liked episode 2 a lot. I liked the two characters that it brought in, especially the Banshee lady, who is she's just sweet and nice, and it's her story like kind of hits home in some ways, but this was never going to be on the top 10 because, I mean, as much as I really like the lo-fi soundtrack a lot, there is also an argument that it all blends together, and I get that. This track specifically, 24 Hours Rainfall, I picked because I don't know if this was like intentional or not, because it handles music the same way the first game does, where for the most part, music is just playing on a playlist off the player character's phone. But this song played during the last scene of the game, which involved two characters from the first game having just gotten married and everybody going back to the coffee shop for the after party. And it was such a sweet and nice scene that this song kind of cemented itself as my favorite.
A game I've had my eye on the whole year to the point where I bought it alongside Tears of the Kingdom is here on my honorable mentions, and this is Fire Emblem Engage, with music on the soundtrack composed by Yasuhisa Baba, Kazuki Komai, Hiroki Morishita, Takeru Kanazaki, Fumihiro Isobe, and Takafumi Wada. And the track that we have picked here is Engage Main Theme. Got to get to these newer Fire Emblem games. I slept on Three Houses. I've got Engage just installed on my Switch. Got to get to it sometime.
I enjoyed Fire Emblem Engage quite a bit. It's another game that like came out like at the beginning of the year, so I have to actively remind myself that it came out this year.
That's right, yeah.
Because it was January, wasn't it?
Sure was, yeah.
It was January because I played it when I was at Disney World. My personal favorite track is actually a rearrangement of a track from another Fire Emblem game, because there are a lot of those on this soundtrack, being the whole gimmick of the game is you're assisted by characters from previous Fire Emblem games.
Right.
And it's the rearrangement of The Devoted from Path of Radiance. The only reason I know it's from Path of Radiance is because A, it plays on an Ike map, and B, it's in Smash. But that rearrangement is awesome, but it would feel kind of weird to put down a track from another Fire Emblem game to represent this Fire Emblem game. So I'm glad. Shout out to our friend Fossils, who suggested us a few tracks and then came to the conclusion that, yeah, the main theme's probably the best one to highlight in this kind of context. So yeah, thanks for that.
Another game that gets its main theme shouted out, another one of my honorable mentions here is Hi-Fi Rush, which I had at number 8 on my list. Music for this game composed by Shuichi Kobori, Reo Uratani, and Masatoshi Yanagi. The track I picked for this one is The Rush. Although it is a soundtrack that does use some licensed music tracks as well, when you don't have streamer mode toggled, granted, the tracks that they replace are good replacements for it, I think, but there is something about hearing the Black Keys' Lonely Boy play during the opening credits. That's awesome. And for 9 Inch Nails to kick in during a couple boss battle tracks is fantastic. But for this main theme, the rush that plays during the first chapter kind of gets you right into it and kind of gives you a sense of the musical theming that goes on. You hear the beat driving the whole experience as you have combat that plays out to that rhythm. And man, if you miss old PS2 character action hack and slash games, like if you like a good old Kingdom Hearts feeling kind of game and you miss that kind of PS2 game feel, Hi-Fi Rush is it. And man, shout out to Tango Works, because to go from Evil Within to make this kind of game is bold, but I think they nailed it.
For some reason, the soundtrack didn't grab me when I was listening through it. I don't know why. Cannot, for the life of me, explain why. But Hi-Fi Rush it is not currently installed, but it is on my "This is on Game Pass, play it, you idiot" list. 100%, because rhythm-based character action game sounds rad. Okay, y'all knew this was coming. Just, if you didn't see this coming, then I'm sorry, you're a fool. My next honorable mention is, of course, Idol Showdown, with its soundtrack being made of fan arrangements by Hamsley, Nate, Neko TJ, Yamakusa, Master Jonald, G Galactigal, and Auricross. And the track that, for me, is the best representation of how good this soundtrack is Bloodlust Red. This game's soundtrack is just so damn good. So damn good. This probably would have been my number 11. But I also I say that with the knowledge of, like, it wouldn't make it onto the top 10, and it probably honestly shouldn't, because this is for me. I love this game's soundtrack. It is one of my favorite of the year, 100%. And yeah, I just want to keep pushing that home. Damn good stuff. And also, I want to give a shout out real quick. Games like this and HoloCure have actually led to Hololive doing something I think is really cool that I don't think I see a lot of companies do, which is they set up an indie label for games, like where they will publish games made by fans that allow the developers to sell the game for money. And that's super cool. And there's no doubt that it was the success of HoloCure and Idle Showdown that actively showed them that there was money to be made there. And now, like, fans can get official support. Never seen another company do that, and I think it's super rad. I feel like that is worth shouting out.
A soundtrack that caught my attention for similarities to another that the composer does is Master Detective Archive's Rain Code, composed by Masafumi Takada. And how does Takada work up this next IP in the vein of Danganronpa? Well, with the main theme that goes during the title theme, and this is called Rain Code. It's literally the next game for me to play in my Switch, but kind of getting the listen through the soundtrack. It's like, oh, I think I'm really going to like the experience it takes me on there. Not enough to put it in a top 10 or anything like that, but it's definitely a theme that gives me a lot of Danganronpa callbacks, and that's a good thing.
You're going to have to let me know how it is, because I feel like this is a game that came out and then I did not hear anybody talk about it at any point.
Yeah, I feel like it's just going to aggressively be a 7.
Yeah, I assume that is probably the case as well. My personal game of the year is my next honorable mention, and that is Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals, with its soundtrack by Scientific, full of Oxenfree. Both of them continue to have like the best sound design I've ever heard in a video game. I will die on that hill. But for me, the best moment, well, one of the best moments of the game, and the song that plays during it, were a no-brainer for what's track to highlight. This is Plots. Oxenfree 2 is so good. I played it when it launched, obviously, and really enjoyed it, but then in October, I co-piloted Alex DeFreitas at NWR playing through it, because last year we had played the first game in the same way. And man, that playthrough just solidified it as, no, this is my game of the year. It's so damn good. Again, it probably would have been close to being on my top 10. But, I mean, again, there's just so much good stuff out this year that it just had to go to honorable mentions, unfortunately.
It's a series that I'm so overdue for playing, but you know what? Netflix games. Though, last time I tried to play a game on mobile through Netflix games, it did not go so well. It's a problem to play Immortality when the movie clips won't play.
Oh, no.
So there's that. You download 26 gigabytes of movie clips and then you can't even see any of them. Woof. A platformer that wears its inspirations on its sauce-stained sleeve is here in my honorable mentions, and this is Pizza Tower, with music by Ronan de Castel, Classic Yugito, and Post Elvis. And in all of the different pun-themed titles, one that stands out for its music as well, admittedly, but this is The Death That I Deserve-ioli. Love me some Wario Land 4 growing up. Obviously brought it to the show. So to see a game so clearly take inspiration from it is heartening, though that is a jarring art style and maybe something that I have to get over. Maybe that'd be good to play portably.
I want to give another shout out to our friend DKP. They actually were the one who really advocated for this game being somewhere in there, and then gave us the track suggestion for this, and as they put it, half because it's a very good song, and half because they just wanted to hear us say the title, which it is a very strong title. I want to try Pizza Tower, but I kind of agree with you that the art style just is really jarring. But I mean, it sounds worth a shot, and also the soundtrack's extremely good from the bits I've heard of it. So
it's also so interesting to hear like Wario Land 4 samples mixed into it. Like clearly, unabashedly that kind of game, and it's honestly great to see another platformer like it.
Yeah, it's a type of game that does not get me like this is the first one I can think of that is that.
Right, yeah.
Like, that's not really a type of game that indies have really delved into much, at least at current time. A game that I put an ungodly amount of time in, more time than I put in Tears of the Kingdom, might I add.
Oh.
I found that out recently, like a good 20 more hours, is Story of Seasons, A Wonderful Life, with its soundtrack by Dai Nakajima. The remake obviously has a rearranged soundtrack. If somebody else handled the rearrangement, I cannot find who that would have been. I looked extensively. There does not seem to have been an official release of this remake soundtrack. But the song that makes perfect sense to highlight, I had to hear this song roughly 4,000 times. And so now everybody else gets to hear it once, and it's a good thing that it's good. This is Breezy. Story of Seasons had a very, very impactful for me for some reason. I really, really enjoyed the whole thing of having your kid and seeing them grow up and figuring out what kind of person they're going to end up being, and going from like a weird toddler to a terrible teenager to an adult is just such an interesting thing. Though granted, so the love interest I married was Lumina, the musician, and every character has two like designs, one for when they're first introduced and then one for as time has passed. And Lumina gets one in the second year, and then she never ages again. So in the last year of the game, you look like you are melting and could drop dead at any second, and she looks like she's still 20. And so scenes where it's like, nice romantic walk through the forest path is like, I look like I'm walking with my daughter. It was really funny. But Breezy is the song that plays when you are on your farm doing stuff. And it's very, very prominent. It's a song you are going to hear so many times. And again, very good thing that it is a very good song, because otherwise it would have driven me insane.
Not only did you bring Idol Showdown to the show this year, you brought the original A Wonderful Life to the show. So a few more games in your pocket there that show up here. My number 11 game, so to speak, is the one that rounds out the honorable mentions here, and it is Super Mario Bros. Wonder, with music by Koji Kondo, Shiho Fuji, Sayako Doi, and Chisaki Shimazu. What other track could have possibly been picked than one of the other best musical moments of the year? And it is, of course, Piranha Plants on Parade. I have not played it, though I know it's the second course in the game, and you can't escape it when this is all over social media. I mean, what an adorable moment.
I think I need to try playing Super Mario Wonder, because I did not jump on it at launch, because again, my experience with 2D Mario past the Super Nintendo is boring, because the new Super Mario Brothers games are boring. I said it. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. But I've heard so many people talk about how this game is like really good and like different from new Super Mario Brothers in a lot of ways. So it's something I should give a shot. Who knows when that will be, though. I actually don't think I've seen this moment. I've heard people talk about it, but I don't think I've personally seen it.
Oh, well, if that's the case, save it for when you get to eventually play it, because, man, it had to be the one to talk about here. For other games that we were considering at some point, we call them honorable mentions. And if you go over to our social media, our Twitter, at Soundchat OST, you can find that Joe is posting 30-second clips of a track from each of these games to highlight that music leading up to the release of this episode. So go check those out there. But as we burn through them, these games are Anonymous Code by Takashi Abo,
Cocoon by Jakob Schmid,
Disney Illusion Island by David Houston,
Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse by Masafumi Takada and Etsuko Ichikawa,
Forspoken by Bear McCreary and Gary Scheiman.
Ghostpia Season 1 by Hiromu Takano.
Harmony, The Fall of Reverie by Lena Rain.
Knuckle Sandwich by Barch Boy, Nelward, and Lizzie's Personal Army. I'm so sorry about the fact that you are the one that this landed on.
Lies of P by Jung-hoo, Kim, Lidong Sub, Odong Hoon, Park Gi-byom, and Ye Kun-yu.
Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, composed by so many people. Saori Yoshida, Hideaki Kobayashi, Keitaro Hanada, Yuri Fukuda, Shunsuke Minami, Rintaro Soma, 83 Key, Ryo Fukuda, Hyde Lunch, Takahiro Kai, Chihiro Aoki, Satoshi Oike, Hiro, Kenji Mizuno, Yasuyuki Nagata, Junpei Mishima, Mitsuharu Fukuyama, and Tomoyuki Tanaka.
Not to be outdone in the franchise is Like a Dragon Ishin, with music by Chihiro Aoki, Hironori Shoji, Daisuke Anayama, Keitaro Hanada, Takatsugu Wakabayashi, Sachio Ogawa, Saori Yoshida, and Zenta.
Little Goody Two Shoes, with music by Donovan Sama, Pontus Magnusson, Yuichiro Tsukagoshi, Oka, Yuzu Kimasu, Mick Mangoes, and Bean.
Mr. Saito by Laura Shigihara.
Risk of Rain Returns by Chris Christodoulou.
Slay the Princess by Brandon Boone.
Star Wars Jedi Survivor by Stephen Barton and Gordy Hobb.
Starfield by Inon Sur.
Stray Gods, the role-playing musical by Montaigne, Austin Wintory, Tripod, and Alex Mukala.
Street Fighter VI by Yoshia Terayama, Shigeyuki Kameda, Yasumasa Kitagawa, Tom Fox, Marshall Smith, and Haruki Yamada.
Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars by Yoko Shimomura.
The Talos Principle 2 by Damian Mravunak and Chris Christodoulou.
Thirsty Suitors by Marsky and PRI.
Venba by Alpha Something.
And World of Horror by Questa and Sebastian Zabowski.
A bunch of games, a bunch of great music, but now it's time to get to our number one. What do you think it could be?
Well, before we do that, let's go over what the rest of the list was real quick. Review it. At number 10, it's The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.
Number 9, A Space for the Unbound.
Number 8, A Highland Song.
Number 7, Alan Wake 2.
Number 6, Marvel's Spider-Man 2.
Number 5, Final Fantasy 16.
Number 4, Baldur's Gate 3.
Number 3, Sea of Stars.
And number 2, Octopath Traveler 2. And I would certainly hope that you can guess what number 1 is, considering the fact it has not shown up in the rest of the list, because number 1 for our top 10 soundtracks of 2023 is Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. Composed by various artists. There's like 30 people who worked on this game, or at least contributed music to this game. We would genuinely be here all day if we listed all of them. I am going to say who did the tracks as we get to them, so let's get into the Critical 5. The first is I Wanna Know by Too Mellow. Critical track number 2 is Condensed Milk by Cybermilk. Number 3, we have Get Enough by Hideki Naganuma. Number 4 is Feel the Funk Computer Love by Sebastian Knight.
Yeah, baby, I'm the funk. Put your hands up. Put your hands Yeah, baby, I'm a funk.
And of course, number 5, my personal favorite song in the game, "The People" by Hideki Naganuma.
Push me to the max.
It's interesting that The People is your favorite. Get Enough is my favorite, for those wondering. I think it's just a really good example of, obviously, the spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio. And this is even, before Sega decided to bring it back with that announcement at the Game Awards. But honestly, the kind of electronic music here is, game music from a time gone by, but also brought back and modernized to the point where you really don't hear it so often in games today. And to the point where it's such a refreshing breath of fresh air, especially when Naganuma is using all the samples that he does. It's just so neat, so refreshing for a game that's just oozing and dripping style and really hearkening back to the franchise that's more than 20 years old.
And it's also really cool in terms of the soundtrack that a lot of these artists seem to be people that were inspired by Jet Set Radio back in the day. In fact, Tumelo, we have talked about him on the show. We even used one of his tracks for the Jet Set Radio episode way back in the day, because he did 2 albums that were the Sounds of Tokyo To and Sounds of Tokyo To Future, which I want to know is from that second album.
That's really cool, yeah.
So he wrote an album inspired by and throwing reference to Jet Set Radio, and now it is in a Jet Set Radio style game. Also, if you haven't played Bomber Cyberpunk, because you have played Jet Set Radio and playing it was like wanting to jump off of a cliff, don't worry. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk comes from a world where playing Jet Set Radio doesn't suck. So, and having all of this music. And like you mentioned, Hideki Naganuma getting to come back and do that style of music. I assume he'll be on the Sega reboot. If he's not, then they have messed up super hard. But yeah, it's just such a cool soundtrack. And like you said, you don't hear soundtracks like this very often nowadays. And it's kind of refreshing to get this soundtrack that somehow feels dated, but also feels brand new. It's really cool. Bomb Rush is a very good game.
You had the game at number 1 on your list. I had it at number 4, and that was just enough to put it over the edge and have it be our number 1 game soundtrack for 2023. And that'll do it for us for this year on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. That's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. It's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts on catchers all around the globe, including Spotify. We have a feed of podcast episodes there, but of course, we also have a Spotify playlist of video game music, where if we talk about a track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this big monster playlist. Instead of asking what's going to be added from this, we try to add whatever we can from the different tracks that we've talked about today. And soon, in about a month, on our anniversary, we'll go over just how long that playlist is. It's always a beast.
I'm partially not looking forward to seeing the hour count that it is now up to. Every year, it doesn't feel real.
More than a day of music, to be sure. And when you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Give us some feedback for us. What do we miss? What would your order of your top 10 soundtracks have been? And give us some suggestions for games to cover in the future. Speaking of which, Joe, who are we talking about next week or next year?
Yeah, a whole year from now. I will be talking about Isaac Shankler.
And I'll be talking about Emil Pagliarulo. To play us out, we'd kind of like to generally sometimes highlight music from a DLC or something like that. You know, things that would have not necessarily been covered. I was almost tempted to bring up the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 DLC. I guess that had a really...
That could have also been a really good contender for this, huh?
Yeah, I guess the final boss track for that was really good. So I give that one a shout. But something dropped recently for our best soundtrack from last year, and it's the second half of the Area of Hidden Zero DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It's the Indigo Disc for Part 2, and I guess that takes place in Unova? Big surprise for both of us, and so not a surprise then if that's the case that they remix some of Gen 5's music for Black and White. Admittedly, some of the best music in the Pokemon franchise. So we'll wrap things up here with the track Battle Trainer Blueberry Academy. Thank you so much for listening this week, this year on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.